Hello and welcome to another in my Introduction to Business video tutorial series, and in this video we will discuss motivating and satisfying employees as well as introduction to teams. This video has a lot of information and we'll start with human motivation in the work environment. To place the study of human motivation in its historical content, we will take a look at earlier views of worker motivation and productivity, including the scientific management view from Frederick Taylor, the Hawthorne studies from Elton Mayo. We'll also be taking a look at the famous Maslow's hierarchy of needs and HERZBERG'S motivational theory, the hygiene theory, theory X, theory Y, theory Z, and reinforcement theory. Next, we'll discuss three contemporary views on motivation, known as equity, expectancy, and goal-setting theory. Next, I'll take a look at several techniques for increasing our employees' motivation in our organizations, including management by objectives. Most commonly, we just call this MBO. We'll take a look at job enrichment, behavior modification, flex time, part-time work and job sharing techniques, telecommuting, employee empowerment, and employee stock ownership. We will end with a look at a very important part of business, that being teams and utilizing teamwork. We'll also look at the types of teams, team development, team cohesiveness, which of course exists with team conflict, and we'll look at the benefits and limitations of our teams. Let's get started now by defining the term motivation. Motivation is most often used for explaining people's behavior, such as with successful athletes are said to be very highly motivated, which is what makes them so successful. Or perhaps, there's a student who avoids work and they're said to be unmotivated because they're not completing the work. Now, the way we will look at it is that motivation is the individual internal process that energizes, directs, and sustains our behavior. It's a personal force that causes an individual to behave in some type of particular way. We often see that motivation is linked to goal achievement for individuals. Closely tied with motivation is another term we should look at, and that's with morale. Now, with morale, we need to think about this as the employees how they feel towards their job, their superiors, and your organization. High morale is going to result mainly from the satisfaction of needs on the job or as a result of the job, and leads to dedication. It can lead to loyalty and the desire for a person to do their job well. Now, low morale can lead to sometimes shoddy work by the individual, could lead to increased absenteeism, and eventually a high rate of turnover within your organization. All of this costs money to the owners and essentially to the end customers of an organization. Well, now that we've talked about morale and motivation, let's move into our discussion on some of the historical perspectives regarding motivation. The first one we'll talk about here is scientific management, and we attribute this to Frederick Taylor, who toward the end of the 19th century became interested in improving the efficiency of individual workers. Taylor's interest stemmed from his own experiences working in manufacturing plants. Through his research, this eventually led to the scientific management. This is the application of the scientific principles of management of workers and of work. Taylor had a job with a steel company, and while there he developed a strong distaste for waste and inefficiency that he saw while working there. And while there, he observed a practice that he dubbed as soldiering. And this soldiering is what we look at in how he described, which workers worked very slowly because they feared if they worked too fast, they would run out of work and therefore they would lose their jobs. Now, after he left this company, he spent several years working at another steel company. While there, he made his most significant contributions, and while there, he suggested that each job should be broken down into separate tasks, and then management can then determine the best way to perform the tasks. They should also determine the job output to expect when the tasks were performed properly, and to choose the best person for each job and train that person to do that job properly. He also said that management should monitor workers to ensure that all the jobs are performed as planned. Now, Taylor also developed the idea that most people work only to earn money. He reasoned that pay should be tied directly to a worker's output. The more a person produces, the more that person should be paid. This concept gave rise to what's known as the piece rate system. With this piece rate system, this is under which employees are paid a certain amount for each unit of output that they produce. So under this piece rate system by Taylor, each employee is assigned an output quota. If they exceed this quota, they receive a higher per unit rate for all work that they've produced. Taylor's system was put into practice and the results were very dramatic. His revolutionary ideas had a profound impact on management practice. Having said that, his view of motivation was overly simplistic and quite narrow. People work for a variety of reasons other than just their pay. Therefore, simply increasing a person's pay may not necessarily increase that person's motivation or their overall productivity. Now let's move on to talk about Elton Mayo. And with Elton Mayo, this is where we come to talk about the Hawthorne studies. These were two experiments that were conducted by Mayo at the Hawthorne plant of the Western Electric Company in Chicago, Illinois. The original objective of these studies, now referred to as the Hawthorne studies, was to determine the effects of work environment on employee productivity. The first set of experiments tested the effect of lighting levels on productivity. One group of workers was subjected to varying lighting, while a second was not. Productivity increased for both groups. For the group whose lighting was varied, productivity remained high until the light was reduced to the level of the moonlight. A second set of experiments focused on the effectiveness of the piece rate system in increasing the output of groups of workers. Researchers expected that the output would increase because faster workers would put pressure on slower workers to produce more. However, output remained constant no matter what standard rates management set. The researchers concluded that human factors were responsible for the results of the two experiments. In the lighting experiments, researchers had given both groups of workers a sense of involvement in their jobs merely by asking them to participate in the research. The level of light, now that didn't matter. In the piece rate experiments, each group of workers informally set the acceptable rate of output for the group. To gain the social acceptance of the group, each worker felt pressured to produce at the same rate as the group pace. This Hawthorne studies demonstrate that such human factors are at least as important as pay rates to their motivation. From these and other similar studies, the human relations movement in management was then born. Now let's talk about the work of Abraham Maslow with something you're probably familiar with, and that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The concept of a hierarchy of needs was advanced by Maslow, who was a psychologist. Here we look at the word need, and a need is just a personal requirement. And Maslow assumed that humans are wanting beings who seek to fulfill a variety of needs, which he argued can be arranged from the most basic to the most complex in a sequence known as his Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can take a look at this visual here. At the bottom of the pyramid are the psychological or physiological needs. These are those things that we require to survive. Some of these physiological needs include food and water, clothing, the comfort of shelter, and sleep. These are those physical things. As we move up, the next level are the safety needs. The things that we require for physical and emotional security are those needs. They may be satisfied through such things as job stability, having health insurance, being given a pension plan, and, of course, having safe working conditions. The next level up, we look at the social needs. The social needs, this is the human requirements for such things as love, affection, and a sense of overall belonging. These needs are going to be fulfilled in the workplace through the work environment and the informal organization, and outside of the workplace by family and friends that are surrounding these individuals. The next level up is the esteem needs, which include the need for respect and recognition. You want the esteem of others, as well as a sense of accomplishment and worth, which will give you that self-esteem. These needs may be satisfied through personal accomplishment, promotion to positions within, with having some greater responsibility in an organization, and various honors and awards and other forms of recognition of the individual. Now, at the uppermost level, this is the self-actuation needs. These are the needs to grow and develop as people and to become all that we are capable of being. These are the most difficult needs to satisfy, and the means of satisfying them tend to vary within the individual. Now, Maslow suggested that people work up the hierarchy, satisfying first their physiological needs before any type of safety needs are met. Needs at one level do not have to be completely satisfied before needs at the next higher level come into play in their lives. People can also move up and down the hierarchy. For example, if an individual loses a very good job that they had, they may find themselves trying to satisfy needs when they only recently had to focus on their social needs. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs provides a very useful way of viewing employee motivation. American businesses have largely been able to satisfy workers' basic needs, but the higher order needs present more of a problem to the organization. Now let's move into talking about Frederick HERZBERG'S motivation hygiene theory. HERZBERG interviewed approximately 200 accountants and engineers in Pittsburgh. He asked them to think of a time when they had felt especially good about their jobs and their work, and describe those factors that had caused them to feel that way. Then he asked them about a time when they had felt especially bad about their work. He was surprised to find the feeling good and the feeling bad resulted from entirely different factors. The first factor was satisfaction, dissatisfaction. His interviews convinced him that satisfaction and dissatisfaction are different dimensions altogether. Now, the idea that satisfaction and dissatisfaction are separate and distinct dimensions, this is referred to in the motivational hygiene theory. The job factors that HERZBERG found most frequently associated with satisfaction are achievement, recognition, responsibility, advancement, growth, and, well, just the work itself. These factors are generally referred to as motivation factors because their presence increases the individual's motivation. However, their absence does not necessarily result in dissatisfaction. When motivators are present, they act as satisfiers. Now, dissatisfaction is caused by job factors such as supervision, the working conditions, interpersonal relationships with workers, the pay itself, a sense of job security, and company policies administration. These are known as hygiene factors, and they reduce dissatisfaction when they are present to an acceptable degree. However, they do not necessarily result in high levels of motivation. HERZBERG provided explicit guidelines for using the motivation hygiene theory of employee motivation. He suggested that the hygiene factors must be present to ensure that a worker can function comfortably. But he warns that a state of no dissatisfaction cannot exist, and that managers should utilize those hygiene factors to make the work environment as positive as possible, but should then expect only the short-term improvements in their individual's motivation. Managers must focus instead on providing those satisfiers that will enhance motivating for a long-term effect. Employee pay has proven to have more effect than is explained by HERZBERG's theory. He suggested that the pay provides only that very short-term motivation to individuals. Yet in many organizations, pay is a form of recognition and reward for achievement. And recognition and achievement are both motivational factors. Now let's move on to talk about the motivational theories of Theory X and Theory Y. Now, with these motivational theories, they were advanced by Douglas McGregor in a book titled The Human Side of Enterprise, and they represent opposing sets of assumptions that underlies management's attitudes and beliefs regarding their workers' behaviors. Theory X is just a concept of employee motivation generally consistent with Taylor's scientific management that I mentioned earlier. Theory X is based on several different assumptions, like people dislike work and they try to avoid it. Another part of that is that because people dislike work, managers must coerce, control, and frequently threaten employees to achieve the organization's goals. Another assumption with Theory X is that people generally must be led because they have little ambition and they will not seek out responsibility. They are concerned mainly with their security. Now, Theory Y is a concept of employee motivation generally consistent with the ideas of the human relations movement. Theory Y here is based on the following assumptions. That one is that people do not naturally dislike work. In fact, work is an important part of all of our lives. Another assumption is that people will work towards goals to which they are committed to. Yet another assumption is that people become committed to goals when it's clear that accomplishing the goal will bring some type of personal reward. The next assumption is that people often seek out, willingly accept responsibility. They want responsibility. The fifth assumption here is that employees have the ability to help accomplish the organizational goals. And then lastly here with Theory Y, this assumption is that organizations generally do not make full use of their complete human resources. McGregor argued that most managers behave in accordance with Theory X, but he maintained that Theory Y is more appropriate and it's more effective as a guide for managerial action. We also have another theory called Theory Z. And with Theory Z, this is from Japan, and it was found out that there are type J firms that have their own characteristics and type A firms. With type J firms, we see lifetime employment, collective or group type decision making, slow evaluation and promotion in these type of firms, a holistic concern for employees as people, non-specialized career paths. And with our type A firms, we see different patterns. These are going to emphasize short-term employment, individual decision making, individual responsibility for the outcomes of their decisions, rapid evaluation and rapid promotion, and specialized career paths. A very few successful American firms represent a blend of type J and type A, and we call these the type Z organizations. They're going to emphasize these following characteristics. We're going to see long-term employment, that collective or that group type decision making, individual responsibility for the outcome of decisions, a slower and for process for evaluation and promotion, moderately specialized career paths, that holistic concern for the employees of an organization, and informal control, along with some formalized measures. Theory Z posts that some middle ground between the type A and type J practices is best for the American businesses. A major part of this Theory J emphasizes participative decision making. Well, now let's move on to talk about the reinforcement theory. The reinforcement theory is based on the premise that people will repeat behaviors that are rewarded, and they will cease those behaviors that they deem as they're being punished. A reinforcement is going to be an action that follows directly from a particular behavior. Reinforcements can take a variety of forms and can be used in a number of different ways. A positive reinforcement strengthens desired behavior by providing a reward. A negative reinforcement strengthens desired behavior by eliminating an undesired task or situation. Punishment. This is a consequence of undesired behavior. Managers who rely on extinction hope to eliminate undesirable behavior by not responding to it. The effectiveness of reinforcement depends on which type is used and how it is timed. Generally, positive reinforcement is considered the most effective action, and it is recommended when the manager has a choice. Continual reinforcement can become tedious for both the managers and the employees, especially when the same behavior is being reinforced over and over in the exact same way. At the same time, it may be necessary to reinforce a desired behavior every time that it occurs. Generally, once a desired behavior has been more or less established, only occasional reinforcement is going to be needed. Now let's move on from these historical views on motivation and move to more contemporary views on motivation. And the one we're going to start with is going to be the equity theory. The equity theory of motivation is based on the premise that people are motivated to obtain and preserve equitable treatment for themselves. The term equity is going to refer to the distribution of rewards in direct proportion to the contribution of each employee in the organization. Everyone need not receive the same rewards, but the rewards should be in accordance with the individual contributions. According to this equity theory, we conceive the idea of equity in different ways. First, we develop an input to outcome ratio. Inputs are the things we contribute to the organization. Outcomes are the things that we get from the organization. Next, we compare the ratio to what we perceive as the input to outcome ratio for some other person, and we call this the comparison other. If the two ratios are roughly about the same, we feel that the organization is treating us equitably, and we are motivated to leave things as they are. If our ratio is higher of the two, we feel underrewarded and are motivated to change things. And if we feel that way, we might do such things as decrease our own inputs by not working so hard for our organization. Or we may try to increase our outcomes by asking for a monetary raise. We may try to get the comparison other to increase some inputs or receive decreased outcomes. One thing we may do is just leave the work situation. Do a new comparison with a different comparison other. This is just 5 different things that we may see. With equity theory, it is most relevant to pay as an eventual outcome. Now we'll take a look at the expectancy theory. Now with the expectancy theory, this was developed by Victor Vroom, and it's a very complex model of motivation that's based on a very simple assumption. Motivation depends on how much we want something and how likely we are to get it. Let's take a scenario here, and we'll consider 3 car salesmen who are candidates for promotion at the car lot for a sales manager position. Now let's say that Bill has a very good sales year and always gets positive performance evaluations. However, Bill isn't sure he wants the job because it requires a lot of travel, long working hours, and stress with added pressure. Now Ted wants the job badly, but does not think he has much chance of getting it. He has had a terrible sales year and gets only mediocre performance evaluations from his current boss. Remus wants the job as much as Ted and thinks that he has a pretty good shot. His sales have improved this year and his evaluations are the best in the company. Using the expectancy theory, we would predict that Bill and Ted are not very motivated to seek the promotion, whereas Remus is very motivated to seek the promotion because he wants it and thinks he can get it. The expectancy theory is very complex because each action we take is likely to lead to several outcomes, some of which we want and some that we don't. As an example, someone who work hard and they put in a lot of extra hours may get a pay raise. They may be promoted and gain valuable new job skills. However, that person may also be forced to spend less time with their family and have to cut back on social activities because they're putting so much time and effort into their job. Expectancy theory is difficult to apply, but it does provide several useful guidelines for those of us as managers. It suggests that we must recognize 3 different things. Employees work for a variety of reasons. These reasons or expected outcomes may change over time, and it is necessary to show employees how they can attain the outcomes they desire. Now let's move to talk about another theory, and this is the goal setting theory. This goal setting theory states that employees are motivated to achieve goals they establish together with their managers. The rewards should be tied directly to achieving goals. Using the goal setting theory, a manager can design the rewards that fits its employees' needs. It can clarify expectations. We can maintain equity and provide needed reinforcement. Using this goal setting theory, it takes into account the goal the employee is to achieve and the rewards that they will accrue if those goals are accomplished. I mentioned in the beginning I talk about some key motivational techniques, and the first of those that we'll look at is management by objectives. And this is a motivational process in which we as managers and employees collaborate in setting of the goals. The primary purpose of this management by objectives, or as I said, most people just refer to it as MBO, is to clarify the roles that employees are expected to play in reaching the organization's goals. MBO is going to increase employee motivation by empowering those individuals with an active role in goal setting and performance evaluation. Most of the management by objective programs consist of really 5 steps. The first step is to secure the acceptance of top management. We need that buy-in. Next, top management and other parties must establish the preliminary goals that reflect a firm's mission and its overall strategy. In our third step, the manager and employee are going to establish the goals and decide what resources the individual employee will need to accomplish those goals. In our fourth step, the manager and the employee meet periodically to review each employee's progress. And then, of course, the fifth step is that of the evaluation. Like many other management methods, management by objectives has advantages and disadvantages. Management by objectives motivates our employees by involving them in the management by objectives process. It improves communication, and it makes employees feel that they are an important part of the organization and how it reaches its goals. However, MBO must have support of top management. It can result in a lot of paperwork, and managers may not like to work out goals with their subordinates. Now let's talk about job enrichment. Job enrichment is just the attempt to provide our workers with a variety in their tasks. It's going to give the employees responsibility for and control over their jobs. And we have job enlargement here. And job enlargement means expanding a worker's assignments to include additional but very similar tasks, and this can lead to job enrichment. The other aspect we look here with job enrichment is job redesign. And this is a type of job enrichment in which work is restructured in ways that cultivate the worker-job matchup. Our next motivation technique is that of behavior modification. This is a systematic program of reinforcement to encourage the desirable behaviors. Specific steps include such things as this technique is going to begin with identifying and measuring a target behavior. And this is that behavior that is to be changed. Next, managers are going to provide some positive reinforcement to the employees in the form of a reward when employees exhibit their desired behavior. Finally, levels of the target behavior are measured again to determine whether desired behavior changes have been achieved. The next motivation technique is that with flexible scheduling. Flex time or flexible scheduling options is a system in which employees choose their own work hours within certain limits that are set forth by the employer. Typically, the organization is going to establish two bands of time. The core time is when all employees need to show up and be ready for work. Flexible time is the time employees may choose whether to be at work. The only condition is that every employee must work a total of 8 hours each day. Two common problems are associated with using flex time. The first one is that supervisors sometimes find their jobs complicated by having their employees who come and go at various times. And secondly, employees without flex time sometimes resent coworkers who do have the ability to have that flexible scheduling option. The next one we're going to look at is with part-time work and job sharing. Now with this, what we're looking at is that we first should probably define what part-time work is. This is where permanent employment in which individuals work less than a standard work week. Job sharing, however, is an arrangement whereby two people share one full-time position. Job sharing combines the security of a full-time position with the flexibility of a part-time one. For organizations, job sharing provides an opportunity to attract highly skilled employees who are not available to be at that organization on a full-time basis. Job sharing is difficult if tasks are not easily divisible or if two people don't work well or even communicate well with one another. Another motivational technique I want to talk about is with telecommuting. With telecommuting, a growing number of companies are starting to allow telecommuting, which is simply just working at home all the time or for a portion of the work week. And there are advantages and disadvantages of this as well. Now, in addition to increased productivity, companies that allow occasional telecommuting have lower real estate and travel expenses. They have improved morale with their employees and the flexibility to access larger pools of employment. It also reduces fossil fuel emissions from putting fewer cars on the road when there's less travel that's needed. Among the disadvantages of telecommuting are where sometimes employees may have a feeling of isolation. There's also the ability where employees feel like they're putting in much longer hours than if they were doing the standard 8-hour workday. And another disadvantage is where employees can be distracted by family responsibilities when they're at home so much. Now let's take a look at employee empowerment. And employee empowerment means giving our employees greater involvement in their jobs and in the operations of the organization by increasing their participation in various decision making. For empowerment to work effectively, management has to be involved in this. Management should set the expectations, they should communicate standards, they should institute periodic evaluations, and then make sure that they guarantee follow-up. Empowerment can lead to increased job satisfaction, improved job performance, employees' higher self-esteem, and increased organizational commitment. Obstacles to empowerment can include resistance by management or distrust of management by the workers. It can also be an obstacle if there's inadequate training to employees and poor communication existing between the different levels of the organization. Let's now move on to employee ownership. And with employee ownership, this is an effective technique for motivating employees. When employees own the company they work for by virtue of being stockholders. Employee-owned businesses directly reward its employees for their success. When the company benefits from increased sales or lower costs, employee benefits directly from this. Employee stock ownership plans, or ESOPs, provide considerable employee incentives and increase employee involvement and their commitment in the organization. In the U.S., about 15 million employees participate in around 9,000 ESOPs and their stock bonus plans. Well, let's move on to now talk about teams and teamwork. Now, it's first obviously important that we know what a team is. In an organization, a team is a group of workers or employees that are functioning together as a unit to accomplish some type of specific task or goal for the organization. Now, there are different types of teams. And while businesses may have several types of teams to achieve many purposes in an organization, I'll talk about 4 specific types. The first one I want to talk about is that of the problem-solving team. With the problem-solving team, this is a team of knowledgeable employees that are brought together to tackle some type of specific problem within that organization. Then we have a self-managed team. So with our self-managed teams, these are going to be groups of employees that are given the authority and the skills to self-manage themselves. The major advantages and disadvantages of these self-management teams can be varied. Some of these advantages that I want to mention are you could see increased productivity. These type of teams aid in innovation in the organization. They can also reduce an employee's boredom by being on one of these self-managed teams, and as a result, they can also boost the employee morale. Now, disadvantage using these self-managed teams could be that there are going to be additional training costs for these teams, or the teams may become disorganized by being self-managed. You could have various conflicts that arise, and leadership roles may be very unclear in this type of team. A very popular type of team in most organizations is a cross-functional team because they consist of individuals with varying expertise, specialties, and skills that are brought together to achieve a common task. And then we have virtual teams. A virtual team is going to consist of members who are geographically dispersed, but using the internet and various forms of electronics, they communicate electronically. Now, it is important to develop and use your effective teams in an organization. As that team matures, it may pass through 5 common stages of development. I want to show those to you here now, and you can see that these stages are all laid out. The first stage is that of forming. In this first stage, forming, team members are going to be introduced to one another, and they're going to begin to develop some type of social dynamic. Through the various group interaction over time, the team members become more comfortable with each other, and we start to see that group dynamics start to emerge. Then we move into the storming stage. Here, the interactions may be volatile, and the team may lack some type of unity. This is the stage at which goals and objectives begin to develop. The success or the failure of the ideas in the storming stage are going to determine how long the team will take to reach the next step. When the team begins to stabilize, this is going to occur during the norming stage. Each person's role within the group begins to solidify, and its members are going to recognize the roles of each other. If it has not occurred already, an identifiable leader is going to start to emerge here during the norming phase. In the performing stage, this is going to be that 4th or 5th stages. This is when your team is achieving its full potential. The members of the team finally work in harmony under the established roles that they've identified and become part of, and they're going to look at accomplishing the necessary goals. In the adjourning final stage, the team is disbanded because the project is complete, and team members may be reassigned to other teams or tasks or return to their role in the organization. Within any team, each member has a role to play in helping the team attain its objectives. Each of these roles is going to add important dimensions to team member interactions. The group member who pushes the team toward achieving goals and objectives plays the task specialist role by concentrating fully on those assigned tasks. The socio-emotional role is played by the individual who supports and encourages the emotional needs of the other team members. Now, some team members you're going to find play a dual role, which is going to be a combination of the socio-emotional and the task specialist roles. And then the fourth role I want to talk about is the non-participant role. The non-participant role behavior is characterized by a person who does not contribute to accomplishing the task and does not provide favorable input with respect to team members' socio-emotional needs. You're going to be able to easily identify these roles when you're in a team. Now let's talk about the concept of team cohesiveness. This is going to be affected by different factors that are internal and external to your teams that you're working on. The ideal team size is generally about 5 to 12 people. Anything less is going to be more demanding. Anything more is going to be very hard to manage and stay on task. We are going to think about different times you've been part of teams, and then when you get into a work team, you'll see that dynamics definitely change based on the size. You don't want large teams because they just become simply too complicated. If you are in a small team, you're going to see very quickly that the group may be excessively burdened and tasks may not get completed because you don't have enough people to disperse the tasks to. One of the most reliable ways to build cohesiveness within your team is through competition with other teams. A favorable appraisal from an outsider may strengthen your team cohesiveness as well. Teams are also going to be more successful when goals have been agreed upon beforehand. And then frequent interaction is also going to build your cohesiveness and not just meeting like once a month. Well, with our cohesiveness, we also need to talk about team conflict and how we resolve that. Conflict is obviously going to occur when there's a disagreement between two or more of your team members. Now, if it's handled properly, conflict can result in improving a team. However, if that conflict turns hostile and affects the work environment, then steps need to be taken to arrive at a compromise. Conflict must be acknowledged before it can be dealt with or used in a constructive manner. Ignoring the conflict may cause it to simmer and grow, and this is going to result in disrupting your team's progress. You don't want that to happen. Well, let's finish talking here about teams by addressing the different benefits and limitations of teams. Teamwork can be a key to reducing your turnover in your organization and your costs and increasing your productivity. It can also be a benefit for your customer service and your product quality. There's also evidence that working in teams leads to a higher level of employee job satisfaction and a harmonious work environment. However, the process of organizing teams can be stressful and very time-consuming, and there's no guarantees that the teams are going to develop effectively. If a team lacks that cohesiveness and is unable to resolve conflict, the company may experience very low productivity. Hopefully, the organization that you're in is going to provide some very high-quality team training to its employees so they understand the roles and the benefits of being in teams and the effectiveness that can come from being in a very high-functioning team to meet the objectives of your organization. Now, there's a lot of information that I've given you in motivating and satisfying your employees and having productive teams. I hope you will take this information forth and maybe look into more of the motivational techniques that are appealing to you and knowing what works best in your environment and how to have very effective, productive teams in your organization. Thanks for following along and have a great day.